Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. Now, here are your hosts, John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right, welcome into the Mental Advantage Podcast. I feel like I'm going to introduce myself again, Brandon, because, and I think we even started our last show like this, but, as we were just talking about before we came on the air, life gets crazy, and it seems like it's been crazier than ever for us, lately, with just all of the work responsibilities, parent responsibilities, health responsibilities, so we apologize that it's been a little bit since our last episode. Some of you probably aren't even realizing that, but we were just talking about before we came on, how, as we look into 2024, I think what we're going to shoot to do is make a commitment to you guys to have a couple shows a week, because the guests continue a month. I'm sorry, a couple shows a week. Yeah. Instead, because we couldn't.
Yeah. Because we were only able to do 30 shows this year. We thought you would want to see that in the first half of next year. Yeah.
Because we could not fulfill our obligation, we decided we were going to up that obligation.
Yeah,
so
it feels very Goggins-esque. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So no, but guys, we do thank you for your patience in waiting this thing out. We felt like today, as we wrap this thing up, this would be a good opportunity for us to do a look back, and really, we're so grateful and have been for all the guests that we've had on the show in 2023. I mean, I guess what is this this will be the start of a third season.
Year. Yes.
Yeah, third year. So in 2 years, I mean, when I think of some of the guests that we've had and some of the guests now that we're seeing on TV and we're seeing national figures, and some of them already were, but I mean, it just amazes me when I see somebody like Brett McCabe be interviewed on Golf Channel, and I'm like, the guy's been on this podcast twice, so it's a really cool thing. But yeah, I definitely think, what we're going to do with this show is just take a look back at 2023, some of the great guests that we've had. And some of y'all may remember we did a similar show last year, and it's just a good reset for us to not only think about some of the guests we've had, but we'll share some of the takeaways that we had from those shows as well. So sound like a plan?
Works for me.
All right. Speaking of which, and if I don't say this now, I might forget, but I'm looking down at the calendar. It's 12/21. 3 days from now, my man here is going to be turning. Well, you don't have to say your age. It's going to be happy birthday.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's 51, and it's it's another time around. So,
you know what? That's right. Because last year this time I was on my way over to Atlanta.
Yeah. So
surprise birthday party for you.
Little surprise, and so here we are, made it through another year, and blessed to do it, and happy to be here this evening for sure.
Awesome. Well, okay, so let's start there. So shortly after this birthday party that Marty put on for you, we had started out the year with Mental Warrior, our good buddy China McCarney came on the show, and every time China comes on, and we're not going to go through each and every show, but I wanted to point out something about China. So, once they're on the show, and usually just a little peek behind the curtain for the listeners is we're usually big fans or following them on social media. We've got some connection to them. that gets them on the show. And China is one of those guys that we had met originally through Alan Jaeger, because China is very involved with Jaeger Sports. And, but I was texting with China actually this morning because, guys, if you're not currently following him on social media, you need to. But China had a really cool message that he had sent out about the importance of try agains. And I thought was a really, really good lesson in, how we talked about life as a series of try agains. And he said, if you do something that works, you just try again to repeat it. If you do something that doesn't work, try again to get it right. Like, it's just that, always kind of moving forward mentality.
100%. And, when he comes on, his vulnerability on this show and what he's willing to share, it makes him kind of a favorite of the listeners.
Yeah, no, it's really good stuff. And after that, we had the pleasure to talk with, I should say, Dr. Matt Park, who came to us with the mindset advantage. And, as I thought back on that conversation we had with Dr. Park, who's somebody I want to say that we found out about through Roger Kitchen Jr., who's been on our show a few different times. But as I was reflecting back on that, Brandon, I was thinking about the idea of metacognition. That was something that for the first time really came into my headspace from that show, was that thinking about your thinking. And just being mindful of how you're
being
thinking.
Intentional of it, right? And
yes.
That was one. I can't believe that was at the beginning of last year, because it doesn't feel that long ago. But yeah, I mean, just even the way that he had that, the way that he even taught the intentional breathing was different than some of the other folks we've had on before, right? Where he wanted you to really, speak out the number of the breath and all that, and how all of that would take your mind off of wherever it could wander and kind of refocus it. And yeah, that was a good one for sure.
Yeah, it's funny you're talking about that with the breath. I feel like the one thing that, and you and I were discussing this earlier today, about how mental performance, just psychology in general, all of these things that we tap into on this show have it seems like that groundswell continues to grow and grow and grow. And I don't remember what I was watching recently, but it was a movie, I think, or a show on Netflix or something like that, where it was talking about one of the characters in this show was saying, this is a tactic I use to calm myself down. And they were like really focused on their breath, and they were counting it out, and they were basically doing an exercise of box breathing. But I thought, man, here we are, like we're already,
and it's one of those things too, though, where is it more prevalent than it has been, or we just kind of tuned into it a little more? Maybe, but for sure, one of the things that you and I have noticed, going back to talk about the episodes and stuff, is everybody that's in this arena now is extremely busy. This whole mental performance and just kind of getting people right, on the mental standpoint, is just created, certainly a big demand on some of the folks we've been fortunate enough to have on the show.
Well, if you think about it, if you just looked at mental assessments as a whole right now, I mean, you look back on this year, we had Dr. Brian Davidson from MindView on.
Yep.
We had, the other, let's see, we had General Bob Caslin, Dr. Troutman on. Caslin and Dr. Matthews, and talking about the list of, different character traits. We had just recently Mike Taylor and Roger Kitchen Jr. with Ag Diago. So, I mean, it's like everyone's looking, and we've talked about this before, but everyone's looking to get that edge, whether it be in the corporate world, whether it be in the athletic world, in that edge. And I want people to understand this. And I think by virtue of you listening to this show, you probably already understand it to some degree that something has prompted you to listen to the Mental Advantage podcast. But it truly is in the title of the podcast it's the mental advantage. It's everyone's trying to assess how much of a mental advantage this person has and how can we leverage that.
And I think, though, too, John, what it also highlights a little bit, and we did talk about it on the last show, we have become societally so short-minded. And on top of that, we have become so unforgiving, right? Because some of these assessments have been put in place because people can't afford to be wrong with their own assessment. Whether that's a coach who can't afford it because if he gets this one wrong in the transfer portal and all the stuff that goes into things now, it can cost people their jobs and their livelihoods if they're not a little more accurate. So it is really interesting to me to see how all of this brain power, pun intended for the listeners, so give it up at home, but how how all this brain power is now kind of being used to find, like you said, a different advantage, but not just on the mental side, but how that you're tapping into it to be physically better, to be more resilient, and all the things that you need to be. So it's definitely an interesting spot to be at.
And I think you touched on it there in the end, is that it's also being well-rounded. It's like that's how do you pull it all together? Because as we talked to Mike Taylor about this, is, he's like, look, the star system, the 5-star system used to be, and still is to some degree, a good assessment tool. But at the end of the day, you can have somebody who's 4-star talent, but if they don't have that mental side of it, and it's the same thing for somebody in the corporate world too, is you can have somebody that's a really good salesperson and has all of the skills and competencies needed to be effective account manager. But if they don't have that mental thing, or as Mike Taylor said, what's between the ears and behind the chest, that's the key. And it's funny, Brandon, because as I was reflecting back on the year, I just, once again saw this fiber going throughout the course of every single guest, every single show, is but between the ears and behind the chest. That is the same kind of stuff that, Mike Matthews and General Bob Caslin talk about, with the character edge, which was, the strengths of the gut, strengths of the head, strengths of the heart. Like, these things are all connected. And that's that thing that people were, whether it's Angela Duckworth with grit, whatever the case may be, Brian Davidson with MindView, everyone's trying to dig in and tap in and figure out, what it is that's under the hood, so to speak.
Well, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what you got to have. And I think, again, where we've seen a shift is that those people that have that are not, quote unquote, normal today. Right. I saw something somewhere that a coach was talking about, the kids from when he played to now being, an older gentleman and coach. And he said, look, when I played, we talked about, and what was expected of us was responsibilities and obligations. Right. And he said, and the players now are talking about, rights and privileges, right? So it's this shift that has gone from almost societally having that grit instilled in them because of our culture, and versus now where if you have those things, it's special, and that's what they're looking for. Because how many people with these assessments came back and said, yeah, if you looked at the one common thing that everybody was looking for, it was the ability to stick it out. It's resilience.
Yeah.
They call it different things, like you were saying a little while ago, but it's the you're going to be put in a tough situation, and I'm going to look next to me, and you're still going to be there. Right. And that's
and Brandon, this brings up something that has been bugging me. And every time we talk about this, I feel like our conversation always heads this direction, but you just hit on it. And I think these bowl games it's so frustrating to me. Forget even being somebody in the mental performance side, like we are like talking about this, but from a coach side, from a parent side or whatever. But this idea that I get the portal, we've kind of beat the portal to death. It is what it is. I do think it's interesting that Mike Taylor, who is as dug in to college football specifically as anybody that we've ever met.
Yes.
One of the things he said very clearly in the beginning of that show was, I fear for where the future of college football, like in general, because I think everybody involved in it. There was just Chip Kelly came out with some comments this week about it.
I saw that. Yeah.
But I do think that in general, but my concern, I guess, and it probably is more from a parent coach standpoint, is this idea that now people are putting their names in the portal or whatever, but now they're foregoing, to your point, that resilience factor, that loyalty factor, that obligation factor, responsibility or whatever. They're foregoing these bowl games for no other reason than selfish reasons. Like that's the only thing that is, I don't care who it is. That's the only thing that you can convince me, or I should say can't convince me. Somebody can't convince me that it's anything other than, what have you done for me lately? What am I going to do? And I just worry about them. I do. I futuristically, I worry about them.
And I would agree with you. I think though that where you and I probably lose some credibility is it was a long time ago when our belief system was kind of established and cemented.
Yeah.
I think, with kids that are in school now, most of them, at least from a formative standpoint, most of those kids grew up when the bowl system and even the way that they grew up hearing, well, why can a coach leave and I can't? And they grew up playing a game and probably didn't know that their favorite player on that game wasn't getting his name, image, and likeness, and or getting paid for it, and just stuff like that, right? So I think where we have to cut them a little break is they don't know any better, right?
Right.
We grew up without the bowl system that was only 2 or 3 bowls to decide a champion. Every bowl mattered. Yep. Every team was excited about any bowl opportunity because there weren't as many of them as there are now, but they all mattered. And so playing in them mattered. And we talk about culture a lot on this show. Well, the culture in college football now is get paid. And so and by the way, that didn't take long, right?
No.
I mean,
we went from nothing to absolute anarchy. Yeah.
Right. And so I think from the standpoint of some of these kids opting out because they're either going to go, they know we have set up a system that will not reward their effort. If they go and they play in a bowl game, so what?
Right.
We are a move on society. Great. You played. Good for you. Don't care. See you later. For Auburn, you played for Auburn in the Music City Bowl. great. Versus for a lot of those, and the guys that know that this is probably their last game are going to play. The guys that think they have a shot either at another school or in the NFL are going to just sit out because they are going to get paid or try to get paid. Excuse me. And nobody is here telling them don't do it. Mommy and daddy aren't telling them don't get paid. All their friends aren't telling them don't get paid. Their NIL agents aren't telling them go get paid. I mean, kids are getting paid to go take we had a early signing day yesterday.
And take a visit.
$7,000 to go just to go listen to a program that wants to dote all over you.
Right.
24 to 48 hours and tell you how great you are. Hey, I'll let you do that if you'll pay me $7,000. Like, really? That's kind of nuts.
So one of the things you led off with there was the fact that you and I came up during a different time when it came to this. And I almost think to myself, and of course, this is going to be a little bit, people at home might be like, oh, of course they're going to say that. But I can't help but think, like, would I have liked to have had $7,000 to go take a visit somewhere? For sure. Would I like to have had millions of dollars to play a sport that I love playing anyhow? For sure. Would I be the same person today? I think if I had done those things, I don't think so, because that idea of, like, needing to be hungry for a little while. Like, I use this analogy, about my son, his first job out of college was a lot better than my first job out of college or whatever. Right. And I remember when he was kind of like looking at the, weighing out all the things about, like, should I take this job? Should I not? Should I wait for another? He had a couple of other options. And I said, I think you should, but I almost wonder if you're going to miss out some because it was a comfortable salary and it wasn't something that was going to have him be hungry. It wasn't something that was going to have him maybe be paycheck to paycheck for a little bit or worry about the apartment, rental and all that other stuff or whatever. So I do think there's something to be said, because what my concern now is that when we're paying all these kids what we're paying for them to play college sports, and they're not all getting that, but the ones that are, like, where do you go? Like, if you don't make it, because we know the percentage of people make it the NFL is very small.
Oh yeah.
So you better damn well make sure that couple mil that you have been earning at whatever state is going to last you.
Yeah, it will. And I don't want to, because this is probably worth a whole different episode about what our society will look like when you have significant wealth in a younger generation than more significant wealth in a younger generation than an older generation. We've never had that.
Yeah.
But the NCAA has the ability now to potentially unleash millionaires to your point that have no idea what they're doing. They've never had to save, right? And what does that look like, and ultimately what kind of strain when they run out of money? What does it do to them mentally when and if they run out of money? So it creates all kinds of challenges that we could sit here and dissect for 3 or 4 hours, right?
Yeah, it's for sure.
We'll have to save it for when one of us has a road trip, but it's scary. It's a scary thing. And I think it's why it's so important that the people that we have on our show are out there, and they're doing really good work by a lot of really needy people.
No question about it. And look, one of the things that we were just discussing there was that the groundswell, if you will, as far as mental performance goes, I also think that one of the things that those of you who have been with us for both seasons, both years, that we've had the show, that show's been in existence. You probably noticed that at some point during about the middle of this year, we made a conscious effort to we definitely always want to bring folks in that are going to be talking about the systems and strategies and all that good stuff. But we also shifted focus a little bit and tried to bring in more guests that were going to be telling stories and had very inspiring stories of how they were using all of these systems and strategies, whether that was organically or whether that was something that was a learned, skill set. But one that comes to mind was Dr. Mary Ritz in the episode of Just Move Forward, because, she talks about growing up in Zimbabwe. And I have to say that every time I think about Dr. Mary Ritz, I think about her dad's story and how, one of the things that growing up in Zimbabwe, his mother sells their only I think it was a cow or a donkey or something like that she sold to get the money to send him to school.
Yes.
And then he goes to school and he's having to work in the mines or the fields in the morning and then go to school in the afternoon, just so that they could still make some money and he could learn. But I thought it was such a great story about advocating for yourself too, because I remember her telling the story of him saying when he goes to the mines after he graduated and the madam of the mines says, hey, go into the mines. And he says, wait, let me clerk for you. I'm learned. I'm
educated.
I'm educated. I can do your books. I can do. And that was such a game changer because he then gets to go do that instead. Yeah. Then he builds his way up into management, stuff like that. And then how that had such a powerful effect on him that when he had all daughters, that he understood that education was going to be their currency, that this was the thing that was going to be, that if nothing else, he was going to make sure that we're in a country like Zimbabwe where women are marginalized. He knew the power of education.
Absolutely. But I think the takeaway there, like you said, I mean, not just in what you're saying, not in Mary's story, because there was a lot in her story, but the self-advocacy is again something that I think is so needed today. And it's probably for 99% of us, it doesn't need to be to the level that they had to do it. Right. It's right. Just knowing and believing in yourself and being in the right mindset to allow yourself to self-advocate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that too is understanding, like, we've talked about this before, is just those routine assessments of like where you are to be able to then advocate for yourself. And I think that, whether it is, the episode where we had Aaron Mashpitz on, You Are Loved episode or whatever, is like this idea of advocating, to take that a step further, is like, this is so important because sometimes that advocating for yourself means saying, I need help.
Yes.
I can't do this on my own. This is really becoming too much for me.
Yeah.
I'm recognizing thoughts that I'm having that I shouldn't be having, or whatever it is. Because, Aaron shared the story of his sister who committed suicide, or no, it's not committed suicide, died by suicide. Is the way he described it. Is that, that episode for me was one that really made me think about, not only that self-advocating and kind of, but it's that, I think he shared the validate, appreciate, and refer was like, if somebody does come to you and they are advocating for themselves and they are talking about what all is going on in their own life, it starts with validation. Like, hey, I hear you. I know what you're saying.
Absolutely.
It's not me saying, oh, it'll get better. Buck up, buddy.
Yeah. Or trying to one up right?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
just let them know that someone is there. Let them know that someone cares about them, is willing to listen to them and for them, and encourage them to advocate for themselves. And if for some reason they cannot, do what you can to assist. And yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's and then that refer piece of it, of course, being that you want to make sure you're getting them to the right people. And sometimes, sometimes it might just be that you listening and being present for them will be enough. But, I would encourage everybody who's listening to this podcast is to make sure that even if you feel like you're as qualified as you can possibly be to be that listener, you are qualified to be a listener. You are correct there. But as far as those next steps, it may be worthwhile to at least refer them to a professional.
Yeah, you may be a good listener, but you may not be a facilitator of what, or a clinician of what they need. But you can certainly be a facilitator of what they need.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good one. Another one, I mean, speaking of Dr. Ritz, was, Vital Akamana, who, I Am Because We Are, was, throwback for me from a conversation I had many years ago, it seems like now, with him, that started out just, over sitting in the same restaurant in Virginia Beach and striking up a conversation with somebody else who was there traveling for business and learning his story about, escaping the genocide. And just, I mean, I know one of the things I remember most about that episode was watching your reaction. I had already heard the story, and every time he was talking more and more, and you just have this look on your face, like, I mean, your mouth wide open, like, what in the world? Like, because he's 9 or 10 years old.
I can't tell you how many times I have reflected on that conversation this year, and it's dozens in terms of the resiliency it took, the just courage at such a young age. As a parent, what the difficulty of choosing what's for the greater good of the country over the safety of your children, like that to me was such a deep and rich conversation. Like, that's one of those that will stick with me forever, in terms of just holy cow, like in terms of true stories, like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What did he say? There was like 70 something % of his third grade class was killed.
Yeah.
What? It just, yeah.
And literally on that trip, he talks about passing like pickup trucks that just had bodies in the back of the.
To see that and to be as happy, to see that and to then see how happy he was allowing himself, the grace that he has allowed himself to be and to feel. Man, if you do that and you experience that at that age, and you can still smile and laugh and be as gracious with your story and your time and just all of it, man, that should be hope for all of us.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about stories that you just sit back and are like, wow. I think we can both agree that the story that stands out, at least it's the most talked about story that I get to this day from people who listen to this episode, was Damon West and the coffee bean. Because I mean, it is, I have more people who come up to me and are like, hey, I listened to your podcast, and I can almost 9 times out of 10 predict the next sentence, which is usually, in that episode, what's the guy with the coffee bean or whatever? And it's like, because it was actually, for a little trivia for the listeners, Damon's episode was the number 2 most listened to episode this year. The number one most listened to episode was the Character Edge, which we referenced a little bit earlier. But Damon's story of just, having this all-American life, getting caught up in just the wrong situation, and then being sent to prison for life and having no hope for getting out other than, potentially parole. And then getting some of those things, everything kind of fell into place. But some of the stories he talked about of life in prison and fighting literally for his life at times, and knowing that, when the one story with Blackjack, that he talks about, the guy they called Blackjack in prison, where he's going up and his roommate says to him, just understand that these fights only end one way. Like somebody is
tomorrow. I went back and read the book again. Yeah. And I think essentially what I believe this is correct. He basically said, look, your life is going to change when you walk into the shower and hopefully you walk out. Right. And, to just hear the listeners get to hear this kind, gentle, wanting to give back. I mean, he, again, we follow him. I follow him on social media. Right. I know you do too. He's always giving back. He's always letting people learn from his mistakes, which to me is about one of the kindest things you can do as a human being, is go out, make mistakes, and have the humbleness and the gratitude of surviving that to then share it. So other people won't have to. But to hear him do that and see him do that and know that the brutality that it took to survive in those situations. I mean, it's just, again, and what's also very, very refreshing is he will tell you he deserved every bit of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He doesn't duck his responsibility in the role that he played.
What he say is guardian angels showed up with ARs and bulletproof vests. That's who saved him, because he said the path he was on was a not going anywhere. It's a dead end path or whatever. And so the people who come to arrest him ultimately ended up being the angels for him, because 100%. That was the turnaround in his life, was actually being sent to prison, meeting the kind of people he met. Which that's the other thing too I took away from that episode, is just from a general sociological standpoint, everybody understanding that, everybody makes some mistakes. Some of those mistakes are greater than other people's mistakes, but we've got people in these jails that are wise, elderly people who, for one reason or another, got incarcerated years ago or whatever, but they're giving back to each other. They're, sharing lessons and stuff. And some of those lessons end up making, not only the survival rate in prison go up for particular inmates, but in Damon's case, the coffee bean, that idea that you have the choice to change the environment you're put in, was given to him by another fellow inmate. So this is something that you talk about, paying it forward and passing it down. I also think it funny, because as you were talking about Damon, I started thinking about like him being on the basketball court there. And it goes back to what China was saying about try again, is he had resilience. I mean, the reason he even got to the point with prison was he just had to keep showing up. He had to keep making an idea to make a change. So fast forward a little bit to another episode that stood out to me was Freedom to Fail, which was Major General retired Chris Hughes. Yes. And I thought was such an appropriate title as I thought back to the episode, because one of the things that I wish I had heard when I was maybe 20 years ago, and I hope I did enough of this for my kids, but he said failure was expected by his parents. Like Absolutely. That was a line that really stood out to me, was like, that was, are we pushing ourselves on a daily basis, and whether that's as a parent allowing your kids to be that way, or are we pushing ourselves enough as individuals to get out of that comfort zone? Because I read something recently where they were talking about, it's hard leaving your comfort zone, but it's also hard staying where you are a lot of times.
100%. And I thought that I thought he was great. I thought, again, between him and General Castlin, and just the leadership that we have in some of our in some of the branches of the military, it gives me hope that we have some really, really strong men and women that are helping shape not only young men and women under their charge, but also what we're doing as a country. So
I think General Castlin talks about it as the crucible of life. And, it's funny. You talked about going back and listening to an episode, rereading the book, Damon's book. I went back, as you know, from time to time, I'll listen to the episodes. It wasn't too long ago I listened to the Character Edge episode, and that I think was one of those moments when he's telling the West Point the story about the Army football team, and he's talking about
we know why you. Yeah.
I mean, both of us, like, by the time he gets done talking, you, number one, realize why he's a general, but he is such an effective leader. But both of us are like leaned up into the screen pretty much because, I mean, you're ready to run through a wall. I love how he phrases it. He was talking about how all he kept thinking about, he said Army at the time had lost like 12 years in a row. And he said, I go to this game, the snow's blowing sideways, all this other stuff. He's with another military leader. And he said he just looks over and he's got like a bunch of Army, football players that are huddled around the heater.
Right.
And he said, I look over, Navy's players aren't doing that or whatever. And he was like, he said, beyond just a natural reaction to the fact that he's the superintendent of West Point and these football players, and what he's like, if I'm noticing this, why shouldn't the Army coach be noticing it? But I love where he says in there is, we're in the profession of arms, and our employer is the American citizen. Yeah. And he said, and all I kept thinking about was they're watching this game saying, this is what is going to go and this
is eroding our credibility, I think is what he kept saying, is like that kind of showing erodes our credibility.
Yes. I love it. I mean, it was so great because I was just like, oh my God, that's so spot on. But that's one that stood out. It's so many. I mean, look, this was a special year for us too, and we shouldn't skip past it. Is episode 100 we had this year, and we were able to bring back Dave Meyer, who was our very first guest on the Mental Advantage podcast, and he was kind enough to join us, and it was good to hear what he has going on and some of the things he's been doing, catching up. But that was a special one, and then but again, I mean, you could go on down the list. I mean, I'm looking at this list and I see so many return guests, guys that we've had on the show more than once. Dr. Mo made an appearance in 2023, when hopefully we'll get him to make an appearance in 2024, because he had that good stretch in 2022 where he was like, I mean, I think most people were like, break more Dr. Mo, less John and Brandon.
For sure. For sure.
So if we could get him back on in 2024 would be great as well. Absolutely. Anything that stood out for you as far as the episodes go?
I mean, I think for me, my biggest takeaway from all of our guests was to just strive and to have that we have hope and resilience, right? Not to get super Star Wars kind of a thing, but the thing that the thing that people who make me hopeful, the coaches and leaders and all that, the thing that the hopeful folks are looking for is resiliency. And that, hope doesn't guarantee us anything. Hope gives us an opportunity to get to where we want to go, but the only way you'll get there is through resiliency. I mean, that was kind of my biggest
Well
take.
said. No, I think it's spot on. It's I just think that that's one of the things that, they talk about success leaves clues, is one of the things that I think is common among every successful person is you're going to find that that it's that resiliency. And guys, you don't have to, yes, it's nature versus nurture, right? Like there is piece of this that is because of we're all products of our own environment, that you maybe are more resilient than others. But then there's also people who you can develop it. You can get to a point where you can work on becoming more resilient. But I think that if you can start to instill some of that among your kids, among your players, if you're a coach, among your employees, if you're a leader in the business world, whatever the case may be, is this idea to keep trying, to keep showing up, to keep thinking of everything as an opportunity. Everything is an opportunity to grow and get better. But I think, as I live here in the Nashville area, I just think about every time I see these award shows, or if I see, you're at a concert, which I go to a lot of them, and you hear the people on stage, and they're always talking about the same thing as 10 years ago, I was sitting up in the audience in the third level of this award show, or at so-and-so's concert or whatever. And they talk about the hours. They talk about the, all the playing the honky tonks in Nashville, and the little playing in front of 5 people when it was like, I always think every time I fly out, I just flew to Vegas recently. And when I was flying out of Nashville's airport, there's a Tootsie's in there. My flight's at 6 a.m. There's a dude that's literally on stage playing.
No kidding.
Yeah. People who are they're just got their breakfast, haven't even got a coffee in them yet. And this dude's over there playing, Boot Scoot Boogie or whatever it is. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, that cat right there he gets it, because a lot of people won't show up at 5 and 6 in the morning,
And hopefully he didn't just wander in there, right? Like hopefully it was actually his job. It was a gig, and he didn't think Tootsie's was having open mic karaoke. But either way, he's putting forth that effort and look, even if he is karaoke guy, he's making himself better that day, right? Yes. And just stacking those days, just staying committed to yourself, and making sure that you're never negotiating with yourself on a daily basis to get better. I mean, I think that's where it's at.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I love that. I love that whole, and I think you, I think you said it perfectly there. It's just a matter of just continuing to stack them on top of one day at a time, today plus a day equals the goal, kind of a thing. So, well, guys, we are out of time. Well, at least for this episode, hopefully not out of time in general, but
yeah.
So we're not making any predictions for 2024.
It sounded like we were, because we got apparently 2 podcasts a week that we're going to have to do.
That's right. That is true. Yeah. We are. So send your ideas in for guests, because that is always, if you hear a story, we try to stay on top of it, but I mean, you might hear somebody that you follow in social media, or that you have heard their story, whether that was on Netflix, whatever the case may be. I mean, we're always anxious to reach out and talk to new people. And so that's something that if you have any ideas, or if you know somebody personally, feel free to share with us. You can just write podcast@mentaladvantage.net to make sure that you get that in there. So I always feel like we got to emphasize the .net because I think so many are .com, and maybe that's where all of the emails to the podcast are going is the .com version.
Yeah. The same guy that's playing at Tootsie's has the .com domain.
Who I later sat on next to me on the flight. Now that you mention it. All right, brother.
All right,
we will
buddy.
talk next year.
Yeah,
I first want to throw that dad joke out.
Hey, safe travels.
Actually, we'll talk before then. I'll call you on your birthday. I can't miss the tradition.
Well, I appreciate that. But safe travels. Happy holidays to you and the listeners, and looking forward to 2024.
Awesome. See you then.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.